Awesome. So I get the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. And so our opening keynote speaker is a professor of computer sciences at Purdue University. And he's the founder of the Center for Education and Research in Information Assurance and Security. With over 46 years of experience, he has worked on key security practices including intrusion detection, incident response, and forensics investigation. He has received numerous honors, including being a fellow of various prestigious organizations and a Sagamore of the Wabash. Please, everybody, warm welcome. Give a warm welcome for Dr. Eugene Spafford.
Good morning, everyone. All right. I don't have slides, so I'm not like a lot of speakers, in part because I don't make particularly amusing slides, but also I find that when I do have slides, everybody's looking at them going, what the heck is that, rather than listening to me. So I'd rather talk in a way that you hear about this. I'm going to talk about some issues relating to where we are as a field and where we need to go. And I'll give you this from a personal perspective point of view. Okay, so this is my opinion. The question is, well, why should my opinion matter? Just as a little background, which may or may not give you some context, I wrote my first computer program 52 years ago this month. So for some of you, I started in computing before you were born, which is in some senses frightening and in others illustrative. The field itself is not that old, and that is actually something of a marvel if you step back and look at it from a sort of historian's perspective. And it also helps explain why we have some of the issues we do. And just to give you an idea of some of this, the first digital computers that were really used for anything meaningful were developed in the 1940s during World War II. That was really the emergence of the first digital computers. And they proved of value and accelerated with new developments in electronics and material science and other areas, as well as computing. And we shouldn't forget that those other kinds of things contributed to what we use today. The first commercial computer that was sold in the marketplace was in 1951, and it was sold by a company called Univac. The first all-transistor computer on the market was in 1959, and that was the GE210. That's the same General Electric that makes everything, or used to make everything from light bulbs to locomotives. The ARPANET first appeared in 1969. The Ethernet first commercially offered in 1980. The modern internet came into being really in 1993, and that chronicles an incredible period of development in computing to where we are now with computers embedded everywhere, with the internet and working on 6G technology. We have interplanetary networking right now that not only the International Space Station, but some of the rovers on Mars use TCP/IP for connectivity for sending data back. So 80 years, not even a century, compared to other technologies, has been incredible growth and penetration in our world for commerce and entertainment and education and all sorts of different kinds of things. Security as a specialization traces back in part to our time in World War II, where those first computers were used for code breaking, were used for military planning. But the study of what we now call cybersecurity could be traced back to some of the developments of Project Mac, which was established at MIT in 1963. And then in 1964, an add-on to Project Mac was the Multics project that explicitly had multi-level, multi-user security as one of its goals. That spun off from Project Mac in 1967. And I'm not going to cover other history in between. You can certainly find there are accounts of this. But going from a small number of computers that were operated by a few hundred people at most, back, if we look at like Bletchley Park, to where we are today, estimates are we have on the order of 18 billion connected devices. So about 2.5 billion of those are desktop-type computers. The rest are independent connected devices, like smartphones that are out there, smartwatches, IoT devices, dishwashers, refrigerators, and why we need those connected, that's an interesting question. But nonetheless, we have 2.5 times as many connected devices as there are people on the planet, because we only have about 8.2 billion people given current numbers. And all those computer systems out there in use by those people. Those of us who work in security look at this and we go, well, why haven't we done a better job? Well, part of it is because this is really new. If we compare this to anything like civil engineering, medicine, other kinds of technologies, they've been around for at least centuries, if not millennia. We haven't had the time really to develop where we are. I'm going to speak about 4 things that I believe add to this. Some of these, and actually quite a few more, are in the recent book that I was lead author on, Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions, which I don't believe is offered as one of the book signings, but if you have one, I'll be happy to sign it. But there are 4 things. First of all, we don't have a deep agreement, a formal agreement on what it is we're doing. Second, the commercial marketplace and pressure from the economic factors prevent us from doing better. Third, we're often solving the wrong problem and taking the wrong roles. And then fourth, innovative disruption is constantly getting in the way. So let me talk about each of these a little bit. The first, we do not agree what cybersecurity is. We do not have a definition that we can trace back to doing requirements capture, design, or metrics to even measure how good security is. We've been very good at measuring things like how many calculations per millisecond, or how many megabytes of memory or storage, or what the bandwidth on a network is. But there are no security measures that are portable, reproducible, and generally accepted. We don't even have a common definition of what the field is. Heck, NIST, who we normally turn to for lots of things, has 3 published definitions that don't match each other. And they're not the only government agency that has these definitions. If you go looking, you can actually find several dozen. If you ask someone who's sort of starting in security, or they ask for a brief example, they'll talk about the canonical sort of CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Those don't have good measures with them. They're not orthogonal, and they're not complete. If you start working at this for any length of time, they're really only very good for a superficial description. They certainly don't define cybersecurity. Others have tried to define it. Don Parker developed his hexad, which was 6 elements, but that also fails to cover things. So, for example, if you think about supply chain is not an issue of confidentiality, integrity, or availability if we're going to secure it. And if we have malicious actors inserting things into the supply chain, whether they're software or perhaps surprises in pagers, those aren't covered by those traditional measures. And so we need to have a better definition of what security is and how to measure it. This is also coupled with our inability to really describe in a simple term what it is we do. We started off with talking about computer security, then we talked about computer and network security, then we started talking about information assurance, then we started talking about risk, trust, reliability, resiliency. We have all these terms, different people calling it different things, which is okay, but it's indicative of how we're still struggling to define what is encompassed in what we do, how do we define it, how do we measure it, how do we specify it. Those are all important issues. And I will stress, if we don't have a good definition, we can't come up with good metrics. And without metrics, how do we know if we're doing better? How do we compare one thing with another? You go out to the exhibit hall, you look at all those products, and people are saying theirs is the best at something. Well, is that something that we care about? And if so, how do we compare it with those other somethings? We do not have a reliable set of metrics. And how does this relate to other important things as we start putting computers in safety critical conditions or in socially important areas? How do we incorporate safety and security, privacy and security, reliability and security? They should probably be tied together in some ways, but we don't have security defined well. We don't know how it relates to those other things. If you sort of say, well, we've done fine without metrics, maybe so, but the fact that we continue to have problems is part of this, that we don't know when we're doing better. We also, without metrics, don't fairly take into account the cost in economic terms or in other terms as to what a failure to have security, reliability, even quality in place has on all of us. As an example, for those of you who are not particularly new to the field, think about how much you value your time. What amount would you have to bill Microsoft for sitting waiting for blue screens? We all just accepted that. And that's a cost. That was an opportunity cost. It was often a cost in lost work. But we have no metrics really to do those. Now again, this is not surprising to me looking back as a matter of history because the field is really new. I had a conversation with the late Harlan Mills and we were talking about the relationship of security and software engineering and some of those factors. And he was saying, what we have to bear in mind is where we are right now as a field, as a profession of building software, is equivalent to where the civil engineers were before they invented the right triangle. We are so new, we do not yet have an understanding of some of the deep principles. And many of the deep principles have yet to be put in context with others. So that's one problem we have. We don't have a good definition of what it is we're trying to accomplish and how to build to it. A second is commercial pressure. Despite the fact that we don't actually know exactly what we're trying to do, lots of organizations and people want to use computing. And so there's tremendous pressure to innovate. And the pressure on innovation, as you know, is to get something out to market first and capture mind share rather than to get something out that is correct and isn't going to break in unusual ways. The resulting push towards marketing has often resulted in things coming out that have serious flaws that are only discovered after they're out, or the urge to get something out quickly to be able to capture the most of the market share fails to take into account very important issues. The fact that they're out and they do have market share means they're widely used, and as a result, we have some issues having to do with compatibility. The vendors don't want to take away compatibility from previous products that are out there. Customers don't want to have to pay for something brand new. And this has led to two things. First of all, a downsizing in the market to a smaller number of players. Right? As I mentioned in the history, UNIVAC and GE, those were big computing companies back in the 50s and 60s. They don't exist anymore. And nor does Data General, Digital Equipment Corporation, Sun Microsystems, and the list goes on. So we've lost a lot of innovation, we've lost a lot of capabilities in that they've not necessarily been taken on by the existing products and companies. And those products from those companies, generally when they come out, to keep their market share, to keep the base, they have to make sure everything is compatible, which includes bug compatibility with previous versions. So if you're using Windows now, something that you may have originally used maybe back Windows 95 could probably still run on it and would be bug compatible, except for some security flaws. That's probably not the best way to advance the field. That's part of the problem. And then that consolidation means we're also consolidating down to a small number of platforms. Generally, if we're not working under Windows, Android, IoT, Linux, we're not able to sell a product because people want to use one of those. That's what they're familiar with. That's where we have a huge amount of legacy code that's already available to use. Yes, there are economic advantages to that. However, those designs are based on concepts that were developed 40 years ago, before we really understood where some of the capabilities were, before we had some of the hardware capabilities we have now. And as a result, they are not really the best possible systems that we could be building for the security, safety, and compatibility of what we have now. As a result, we end up with, as I said, dishwashers and refrigerators running full-fledged operating systems. Why do they need a full IP stack and file system? That really doesn't make any sense, other than it's being put in there for marketing purposes. I do not want my refrigerator talking to my dishwasher. They would be talking smack about me, and that really isn't what I want. But that also means, because we're reusing all of this, that we're reusing a very complex ecosystem. We have learned over time, not only in computing but in other fields, simplicity is better for purposes of reliability and security and other kinds of IDs that we want to add. And these are not simple. They have huge code bases. Legacy systems carry along with them. Bugs, faults, misdesigned features tend to increase as a power of the number of new features added. It's not a linear increase. It is a polynomial expansion as a power of the number of those. As a result, as we keep adding yet more and more layers, more and more features, we have an operating system, and on top of that we have virtualization. On top of that we have cloud connections. On top of that we have containers. And then in the containers we have yet more virtual systems. No person alive can actually understand the full scope of what it is we're running in some of these environments, let alone be able to anticipate and prevent some of the faults that are appearing. That complexity is potentially going to do us in, because at a certain point, there's going to be something that fails, and we're going to have a cascading failure of a lot of it. There have been some work that's been done through things like the Santa Fe Institute on emergent errors and how they come about at a certain point when you have too much complexity. And this isn't limited to just the traditional code base. This is also going towards AI and other kinds of systems where, when we cannot understand what it's doing internally and we keep adding yet more features, it will fail in ways that we don't expect. All of this leads us away from new ideas for fundamental changes in underlying architecture, operating systems, and other kinds of infrastructure, because in the marketplace, no one wants to buy something new that isn't plug compatible. And on the research side, I can tell you that the agencies that fund research in academia and other research labs we often get downgraded for talking about building something new. We'll get reviews back going, well, that's great, but will it run Windows? That's not a way to come up with new ideas, new solutions to the problems we have. And it also means that because of these market pressures, because of this push towards yet putting more computing out in more places, you've probably read how there's something like 600,000 open positions in cybersecurity in the United States. And I think the number I've seen is 4.6 million worldwide. Well, most of those positions are not really for someone with a background in understanding and building security. That's for people to set firewall rules and install antivirus and to maybe do some incident response. 20 years ago, when a company would hire a new graduate from our program, they would bring them in for 6 months, 12 months. They would have them in a training program. They would learn how things were done at the company. They could provide input on how to change it and make it better. Now, companies won't hire someone unless they've got 10 years of experience already, and they don't care if they have ideas or know how to build something new. They just want someone to come in and run their programs. That is pushing things towards technologists rather than actual developers, designers, or people who understand deeper issues. Now, that isn't industry-wide, but the trend is clear to someone like me who's been looking at this as an educator for close to 40 years, is that we're moving away from having people with deep expertise and going towards people who can do the technology. That's not a solution. That's going to put us more and more in a hole where if we need new ideas, we're not going to get them. Third thing that I'm going to talk about is this undue focus on the technology rather than on the solution. So if you think about generally what we're looking at in the field now, what we're having to cope with, it's not a technology issue. We're dealing with rise of attackers, ideologic, political, nation-state attackers with different kinds of motives. We're looking at problems in social media. We're looking at disinformation. We're looking at malware, embedded problems in malware, supply chain, networks attack. Those are not technology problems per se. Those are things that are layered on top of the technology. And yet, we have the majority of people looking at solutions by developing or deploying new technology rather than looking at other kinds of expertise to address those problems. Something I reference in a number of places, including the book, Robert Courtney's Third Law. Robert Courtney was one of the pioneers in this field. If you don't know his name, he's someone you should do some research on. But it was a very insightful comment. He said, there are no technical solutions to management problems, but there are management solutions to technical problems. We ignore that at our peril because we try to solve everything by putting a new layer of auditing, monitoring, controls in our systems, which may fail, add to complexity, add to cost, instead of stepping back and thinking about some of the policy issues that we can apply, the legal, the management kinds of issues. We need to be designing for users, too, rather than our peers. This is another thing where we're solving, in part, the wrong problem. We are developing technology to be used by other technologists or engineers, not the general population. This is why lots of things go wrong. Out of that 8.2 billion people in the world, only about 5 billion of those are considered literate. And certainly if you look at social media and political discourse, you think the number's higher. But think about that we have more devices than people, and we still have about 3/8 of the population unable to read or write. What are they using? They're using devices in wherever they live, using images, using graphics, using buttons to move around, or using voice commands, because they can't do the text. And yet we still build with an assumption that they can see that. But that design is failing to consider that they're humans, that we need to make it available to them. And so when things go wrong, we blame them rather than blaming the designers. One of the worst myths is that the user is the weakest link. That's not correct. The user is actually potentially one of the strongest links. They're the ones who care about their data and their processing. They're the ones putting in the time. If we designed for them to be part of the solution, we would actually be much better off. But we seldom do that. We seldom design for them. We design for our peers. And I'll tell you, AI is not the solution to this. AI, again, is throwing technology at a problem instead of stepping back and thinking about, really, what is it we should be doing? In the opening comments, there was mention of this foundation, great for users with limited abilities, limited physical kinds of issues. As I get older and my glasses prescription gets stronger, I become more aware of this. All of you will as well. Some of us age. Some of us have physical limitations. Some of us have different biometrics. We have many cases, for instance, where facial recognition is biased against people with certain skin tones or racial backgrounds. We have differences in culture and language if we want to have an international marketplace. All of these are challenges that we have not been good traditionally in designing for. But that's the population that we would like to take advantage of our designs. So we need to do a better job in widening our perception of who are using our systems and how do we support them rather than setting them up for failure and then blaming them. That also adds to digital divides, if you've heard that term, those who have and those who don't have. Computing, networking, and communication gives us some capabilities to bridge those divides, to get communities to talk together, to be able to participate in the economy, to learn. But if we don't design for that, we can actually reinforce that divide. There's a commercial on TV that I've seen recently where a young boy in a car is talking about an assignment due tomorrow and has whoever's driving the car park outside a building with free Wi-Fi so that he can work on his school project. That's not just something in a commercial. That's the reality for a lot of people in the world today, because there is a divide between those who can afford the technology and the access and those who can't. We need to find ways to bridge that rather than to exacerbate it. Patching is not security. Patching is fixing up where someone else was careless, uncaring, or purposely put problems into play. That's what patching is. And we're not holding responsible the vendors for having to apply dozens of patches or critical patches that are disruptive. For many of us who are working in the industry, we cannot apply a patch as soon as it comes out. There are regulatory issues, there are dependency issues, there may even be safety issues to be able to apply those patches. They shouldn't be there in the first place if the design was done properly. And part of that is because we don't value correctness as much as we value newness. Right? We want the bright, shiny object rather than one that's going to be solid and usable for years. That would be like buying the brand new model of vehicle because it's got a designer color and it's got hubcap spinners, rather than buying the truck that we'll get 200,000 miles out of. We have become, many of us, effectively mechanics and data janitors, because we spend our time putting in patches and cleaning up where people have stumbled over problems or broken in. We're not actually running the systems, we're just maintaining them as effectively as mechanics. I had a presentation and a conversation with Richard Donzik, who's a former Secretary of the Navy, and he gave this great example of the difference in the view of really the heavens of the solar system between Ptolemy and Copernicus. And in the Ptolemaic model, the sun, the stars, the planets revolved around the Earth. And you don't have to look too far to find people that will still say that's the case, and that the Earth is flat, by the way, but I'm not going to go there. But the idea that all of those revolved around the Earth. And they made incredibly complex star charts and illustrations, and you can find many of them in art museums, of how those went around the Earth. But every time they did a measurement where something didn't come out right in that model, they would have to apply a patch. So Mercury in retrograde, if you've heard that, because of the way Mercury's orbit is inner from the Earth, it looks like sometimes it goes backwards in the sky. That's Mercury retrograde. Well, that was a patch that we had to apply. And year after year after year, the astronomers had to apply patches to the model to be able to support the Ptolemaic view. Well, then Copernicus came along and came up with, now, you know, the appropriate model is that everything is around the sun and the Earth is just one of them. And this was treated as heretical. He was vilified. Some of his supporters were killed as a result of this. But his system didn't need the patching. And it gradually caught on. And the people who were using his system were able to predict things that the Ptolemaic astronomers and astrologers could not. We're not yet at that point where we have come up with a system that doesn't do all of the cruft that we're currently trying to support. But when we do, it's not going to be widely accepted because it won't be compatible with whatever, you know, the latest version of TikTok or whatever we're running. But if it is reliable, it will catch on in more places. The fourth thing I'm going to mention is about disruptions hindering progress. That we have made some progress in cybersecurity, reliability, safety over the years, but it's been disrupted by new innovations, this rapid pace in our field. We're going from mainframes to mini-frames to PCs to smartphones to Internet of Things. And it's compounded by the fact that many of us are really excited about these fads. We want to have the newest technology. And for some, it's not only having it, but making boatloads of money off of it. So we see everybody rushing to the latest new thing, right? Remember threat intelligence? Everybody had to have threat intelligence. Then everybody had to have blockchain. Well, now everybody has to have AI. And pretty soon, everybody will have to have quantum. You'll see this, you know, I don't know, I haven't been to the exhibit hall, but you go to conferences and you'll see everybody's advertising, you know, now with the latest in bitchain technology or now with the latest in AI. A lot of that is being driven by billionaires and stockholders who want to make more money. I mean, they advertise it that way. They hype it. They don't talk about the downsides. They don't talk about the adoption difficulties. The employers don't really consider the impact by laying people off and replacing them with AI that doesn't do as good a job. And we're beginning to find out that AI, at least in its current instantiation, isn't all that wonderful. It does a few things well, but it also, hallucination isn't the right term. It's just plain wrong. It's not intelligence, it's statistical modeling. And replacing people with creativity and insight for statistical modeling based on copyright violations of sampling large databases is probably not the direction we should be headed in. But to say that out loud around people who are expecting to make a lot of money off AI tends to make you, one, unpopular. If you think about companies, even security companies, their goal is not to make you more secure. There is no company that has been founded that says our #1 priority is making all of our customers secure and safe from attack. That may be in the marketing, but if they actually followed through on that and lost money at doing so, they would they would quickly have to change executives or maybe even go out of business. Companies exist to make money. And that isn't a bad thing, but we should be upfront about that. That some of them advertise things that don't do what they claim it does, and many of their changes are intended to maintain their market dominance, not to actually improve their products. That's why there's that lock-in. That's why we have the compatibility problem, is rather than innovate, some of those changes are intended to lock in what they're currently providing, rather than necessarily make it better. You think about products that have been on the market for 20 years, why are there still patches being made and upgrades if they were actually working on getting it working and solid in the first place? And I'm not trying to diss any particular vendor. I'm not trying to say, no, we shouldn't make money, because that is not the message. But the point is, we as consumers should be more aware of really what's going on when we look at those products. We should evaluate them on the basis of, do they fit a need? Yes. But where do they fit in the ecosystem in terms of making things better as opposed to just adding more? I saw a study that was done by one of the marketing companies, one of the research companies, that your average large enterprise has more than 50 separate security products running in their enterprise to be able to secure what they have, and they still lose things and have incidents. That is insane if we think about it. Why is it we are buying packages like that? Nobody goes out and buys a car and then has to go to 50 different vendors to do add-ons to be able to drive it safely on the road. Yet we as a field tolerate this because that's what we've been conditioned to tolerate. We need to think about things in a different way. Now, let me get to the last point, which ties some of this together. I'm trying to take the long view here. I will retire eventually, or an AI will take me out. I'm not sure which. And I'm trying to look at where we're going with this. That I'm a firm believer, not in technology for technology's sake, but for technology as a set of tools that we can use to help others, to make our lives better, to be able to explore and innovate, to be creative, not only as technicians, but as artists, as people. To do that, we have to shift away from focusing on simply making more technology, making technology for technology's sake. I think AI is a wonderful example of this. It's being marketed to replace people. Well, can we really replace people? I don't think so. I think there are aspects of humanity that AI is not going to be able to reach, perhaps ever, but certainly not within a short time frame. And yet, we aren't taking that into account. We need to move away from being the janitors, the custodians of the digital ecosystem, and be more into the participants and the enablers. I think down deep, that's what most of you really would like to be. You would like to be in a position where people look at you as not as, oh, you maintain those systems, but rather as, oh, you're doing things to make my world better. Maybe you believe you're doing that now. Maybe you are doing that now. And if so, I congratulate you. But too many of our colleagues, our friends, our peers are simply maintaining systems to be able to continue operation, and they continue to deal with the same set of releases, updates, patches, having to get new and larger and faster systems to run the latest version to do the patching and to be able to do that in a timely fashion. Part of this is we have to demand and produce quality better. We need to do some work to define what that means for metrics and otherwise. But most of us can tell the difference. We can look at something and say, that's solid, that's good-looking code, right? You can say that's spaghetti code, that's awful code, that's terribly done, or that's inefficient, or that's kludgy. Or we can look at it and we go, that's really artistically, that's nicely done. For a long time, Apple was good at this, and they've sort of fallen off a bit as they've gotten bigger. But there are instances out there we can look at. We can demand that quality. We can do a better job at defining what security and safety are. And as we design, as we operate those systems, instead of thinking about how can we make the systems more efficient, if we think about how can we better support the people using these systems, how do we better integrate their particular needs and wants and abilities in our overall ecosystem, I think will result in systems that we are happier with and that will make our own careers and lives more fulfilling. I put this forward as a challenge to you. We changed the world in 80 years. We went from a couple of digital computers with vacuum tubes and relays that required massive air conditioning and did operations on the order of a couple a second, to the point where we have, on average, 2.5 or 3 computers per person alive in the world today. Where we have gone from a sink of dollars and government attention to the point where we are one of the major economic engines of the world. Collectively, we have done that. If we are able to engender that kind of change, what can we do if we focus our effort a little bit differently, instead of simply making more systems to get out there in front of people, to making systems that better support people? That's my challenge to you. It's not going to be quick. It's going to take time. I hope I'm around to see it. But maybe you can say it started here in Houston. And with that, I thank you for your attention.